It's always a profound honor and delight to be here in this remarkable, unique venue and among this remarkable and unique group of people. So thank you very, very much. I've been asked to speak about education in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. So this will bridge a number of the topics that we've discussed. I think a good starting point, like all of us, is Laudato Si, where Pope Francis bids us to pursue a vision of one world with a common plan. And as everybody knows, on September 25th, Pope Francis spoke to the world leaders united in the General Assembly, and at the conclusion of his speech, the governments came as close as they can to a common plan. Not exactly a common plan, but a common vision over the next 15 years, which is the vision embodied in sustainable development and specifically in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. These are meant to be the world's guiding principles for all 193 UN member states for global cooperation and national action in development, and I would say in sustainable development for the coming 15-year period starting January 1, 2016. In the UN's declaration, the concept of sustainable development is expressed as an integral vision that combines economic development, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability. So it is an integral or holistic approach that combines economic, social, and environmental objectives. It is what Pope Francis calls in Laudato Si integral and sustainable development. And I think that its integration is key. The 17 goals that are summarized here are the fruits of 3 years of intergovernmental negotiation and a fair amount of international consultation with civil society and with the public in a variety of ways. These are the only goals we will have of this universal character in development in the coming years. If they fail, I don't think that the world is going to jump to have another 3-year negotiating session. It is a reality that it is extremely hard, and indeed it surprised many, many governments and observers that the world did agree on these goals, because it's not easy to get agreement these days on anything, much less a shared vision of the future. For that reason alone, I would urge that we take them very seriously. But even more than that, I think these are good goals, and I think they're worthy of our support. Now, they are in a context of a very complicated world, of course, but I don't want us to have the impression only of a world falling apart, because while we are in many ways at great peril, there is also some important progress. And of the 3 pillars of sustainable development, the first one of economic development has been proceeding. The second and third of social inclusion and environmental sustainability have not been proceeding in the same manner. But on the economic development side, there has been actually some significant progress. And this is reflected in the most recent World Bank estimates of declining rates of extreme poverty in the world. The biggest gains, of course, have been in East Asia. They've been nothing short of unprecedented in human history, the rate of decline of extreme poverty. It is true to say that China went from being very poor to being very dirty. So it achieved its remarkable economic success in part at the expense of a massive worsening of the environmental conditions. But it did achieve an unprecedented period of 2 generations of rapid economic development, which have transformed the world, transformed China, and transformed geopolitics. But even in Africa, which is the epicenter of poverty, the rates of extreme poverty are coming down. I mention this not because I want us to assume that positive trends are inevitable, but also to dispel the idea that achievements are impossible. There certainly can be very significant progress, and the goals in the Sustainable Development Goals are actually, from a technical point of view, achievable. However, every one of them requires a degree of cooperation and focus beyond that which we have today. Now, for our purposes of education, Sustainable Development Goal number 4 can be called the education goal, though because everything is interconnected, one can say that almost all of the goals contribute to education, and education contributes to almost all of the goals, certainly. But the goal that focuses on education per se is Sustainable Development Goal 4. And the phrasing of it is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and to promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. That's Sustainable Development Goal 4. For all of the 17 goals, there are goals and then targets, and there will be quantitative indicators as well. So I think it's worthwhile to take a look at what the targets are as they've been enunciated, because they are important, practical objectives for education. Target 4.1 is that by 2030, there should be for all children on the planet free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education. Now, the Millennium Development Goals that were in vigilance up until this year focused on primary education. The Sustainable Development Goals add secondary education. That is a huge quantitative step for the low-income countries and especially for sub-Saharan Africa. And the target calls for universal secondary education. Now, even in some high-income countries, there isn't universal secondary education. But in sub-Saharan Africa, the gross enrollment rates at the secondary level are often no more than 20 to 30%. So this is saying that by the year 2030, just 15 years from now, that should be up to effectively 100%. It's not impossible, but you can see that what would be required would be a massive investment effort. And that, I think, is the key. There was a lot of discussion this morning of the lack of education coverage in poor countries, not only in conflict zones or in refugee camps, but simply in poor countries. This is the reality in the world. And what Sustainable Development Goal 4 calls for first is that the access for education through the secondary level should be achieved by the year 2030. This would change the world in an enormously positive way, indeed in profound ways. But it's a huge effort that would be required. Possible? Yes. Affordable? Yes. Achievable? Yes. Likely to be achieved? No. Because what would have to be done would be an effort of cooperation and coordination beyond anything that we have seen. Worthwhile to do, a good return on investment without question. So it bids us to look at how to change dramatically the pace and scale of investment in this area. Target 4.2 calls for early childhood development care and pre-primary education for all children. This is based on now voluminous scientific evidence that the experience before primary school starts is, if not determinative, is a profound impact on all that will come for the rest of the life cycle. And the returns of early childhood development are profound. including pre-primary education. If you look at the lowest income countries in the world, the number of children age 4 who are in some kind of pre-primary schooling are 5%. So this is calling for all children. Again, is it possible? Absolutely. Is it on track? By no means. Target 4.3, to ensure equal access for women and men to affordable quality vocational and tertiary education. This is not saying universal vocational and tertiary education, it's saying gender equality at that level. Target 4.4, to substantially increase the number of youth and adults who have relevant skills, including technical and vocational skills. Well, if there is a weasel word in this, I would say substantially increase, because that will be in the eye of the beholder. So this is one of the weaker targets. Goal 4.5, by 2030, eliminate gender disparities in education and ensure equal access to all levels of education, including persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, and children in vulnerable situations, including, as we discussed this morning. Target 4.6, to ensure that all youth achieve literacy and numeracy, and that a substantial proportion of adults achieve literacy and numeracy. So this is universal literacy among the under 25 cohort. 4.7, by 2030, ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development. So that's content of the sort that Ramanathan just discussed, to know the content of sustainable development. I'll come back to that in a moment, but it includes not only the issues of environment, but also the issues of human rights, gender equality, culture of peace, global citizenship, cultural diversity. And then there are technical targets that are called in the UN parlance means of implementation, of having safe learning environments, increased number of scholarships, an increased supply of qualified teachers. Now, I won't belabor the case for investing in education, but I did want to show a couple of points. First, Nobel laureate James Heckman has really effectively, with a now large literature, shown that investments in early childhood are crucial for achieving returns in later childhood and later in life. And this curve shows the highest returns close to the origin here, meaning highest returns at young age on the horizontal axis, lower returns for investing later on, but it's basically a simple diagram of Heckman's to argue that we have to invest starting in safe pregnancy, actually, safe childbirth, early nutritional achievement, and then pre-primary education. A second graph that I wanted to show you was very interesting. This is a graph in which on the horizontal axis are the test scores recorded by the OECD for about 70 countries in a comparable international testing called PISA, which is the Program of International Student Assessment, and on the vertical axis is the economic growth rate of countries. And you see that countries line up very strongly based on the measured quality of education for 15-year-olds. Of course, this is not a single factor statistical relationship, and this is a partial regression plot, in fact, where other variables are not shown on this regression. But it is a study that shows that the countries that grew fastest economically, which are at the top end of the graph, are also the countries with the best school performance, which are on the right-hand side. So that northeast corner are the East Asian countries, which are scoring the best in educational attainment, student achievement in reading, science, and math for age 15-year-olds. It's astounding, but it's China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, Singapore, which are by far the highest test scores in the world systematically, combined with the fastest economic growth rate. This is the PISA roster, and I just wanted to show you the red arrows are the East Asian countries. The long black arrow is the United States, my own country, somewhere in the middle of the pack. The blue arrows at the bottom are the Latin American countries. Of course, this is only a subset of countries, but it shows the regional differences of educational attainment. Sub-Saharan Africa remains by far the region farthest from achievement on all levels. The upper secondary completion rates in Sub-Saharan Africa are around 20% in general. Post-secondary, far lower. It's a rather dramatic situation. It's got roots that are long-standing. Adult literacy rates are still, in many countries, under 50%. In other words, getting to the basics remains a major challenge, a major goal. This is outside of the war zones, much less in the war zones. If you look at university and postgraduate education, one indicator is the extent of innovative activities in society measured, for example, by patent rates or R&D outlays. And there one can say that we remain with only 3 regions of the world that really participate at a high level in innovative activity. That's North America, Western Europe, and East Asia. And all of the rest of the developing world, almost not at all, in fact, in global patenting. 8 quick suggestions of how actually to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. These are of Sustainable Development Goal 4. These are my personal suggestions. First, as an economist, I have to start with the money. Education is not free. We will not achieve this out of the domestic incomes of the low-income countries. There must be international transfers. 15 years ago, I designed a global fund for AIDS, TB, and malaria on behalf of Kofi Annan. That made a major contribution, I'm happy to say, in the fight against those 3 diseases. We need to mobilize resources for education the same way. I won't go on except to say that the estimated price tag would be about $40 billion a year, which to a macroeconomist is rounding error, but for poor people is the difference of education and not. So this is money that could easily be paid if we care to achieve these goals. Second is special education for emergency contexts like Gonzalo Sanchez-Terán was describing this morning, and Gordon Brown, who's the Secretary General's representative for education, and the government of Norway have explicitly called for such an emergency fund. These children will not be in school, the refugees, unless that kind of emergency funding is available. Third is mobilizing the ICTs, the information and communications technology, for mass educational scale-up. This can make a profound difference. The cost of connectivity is coming down so dramatically that this is one of our most powerful tools for rapid scaling up. Fourth is to deploy new cadres of community-based education workers to help children in school in low-income settings. I could elaborate, but we've deployed community education workers who help households to solve the problems of how to get their children and keep their children in school, and with very high results. Fifth is free online curricula for sustainable development. We put on a course this fall on Laudato Si, which has been viewed by many tens of thousands of people. And this is what free online education can mean, and we, I believe, have a great opportunity. Sixth is rapid upgrading of university education around the world for sustainable development through global networking. I'm directed by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to help put together a global network for these purposes. We have about 300 universities now that have joined together, and we're looking for hundreds more for the purpose of expanding educational opportunities in sustainable development. 7, I'll finish in 1 minute if I might. 7 is to understand that achieving the education goals also requires investments in related areas, in health, in nutrition, in water and sanitation, in energy services, in stopping climate change, if we're to achieve the education goals. So this has to be a comprehensive program. And finally, I just wanted to thank Professor Arbour for getting us started with the idea of the range of knowledge that needs to be imparted. I'm partial to Aristotle's classification of this, where Aristotle argued that 3 fundamental areas of knowledge need to be imparted: the episteme, or natural scientific knowledge; techne, or the tools to solve problems; and perhaps most important for our time, phronesis, which means the wisdom to solve the right problems. That is to have the moral vision of what needs to be addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor.